Why do we say that? Because we hope that it's true all the time. Yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. Why do we say happy Sabbath? Because it's the Sabbath. That's probably the best answer that we could have given. We live in such a busy and hectic world. It's fast paced. There's another email to answer. There's another deadline to meet. There is constant pressure to meet the demands of our jobs, of school, of life. Bills, these don't know about that quite yet. They're about to get a cell phone bill, but there's urgent requests, papers to turn in, another phone call to return. And it's just so easy for one day to just bleed into the next day and the next day and the next day and see that life is actually already passing us by. It was a really busy week this week, and I can't tell you how many times this week Crystal and I had to remind each other what day of the week it was. Thursday, like 3 times, she thought it was Friday. And she goes, what church are we going to tomorrow? Like 3 times. Well, we're not going to any tomorrow, but we're going to Cleom on Sabbath. Because that's just the way our life goes, isn't it? We get so busy and all this stuff crowds our life out to the point where we don't even know what day it is. Happy Sabbath. Life is hectic and it's exhausting. The Sabbath, it literally means to stop or to cease. That's the Jewish word for it is Shabbat. Okay? And when we say Shabbat Shalom, or when Jewish people say Shabbat Shalom, it means peace on your Sabbath, peace on your stopping, on your ceasing of working. Many of us have this view on Sabbath that it's a kind of like this day off. It's a day not to work, which is awesome, right? And we can not go to work, which is pretty enjoyable in itself. We enjoy haystacks and a wonderful Sabbath afternoon nap, right? There's nothing better than a Sabbath afternoon nap. Yes, Clyde. You can thank God for giving that to us. Haystacks and a Sabbath afternoon nap, or all of it. What did you mean by that? And rest. Yes, God gave us the Sabbath to rest. And we're going to figure out what that is, or at least re-go over what that is today. Some of us, it's a day to come to church and to worship, and it can be all of these things, but that's actually not the meaning of the Sabbath at all. Growing up, I don't know if you were like me, but I had kind of a love-hate relationship with Sabbath. As a kid, I wasn't like allowed to do a lot of stuff. But if our friends came over, we got to play like all day, and it was like the best day ever. But if they didn't come over, the Sabbath was kind of a nightmare, right? You just waited till it was over because there was so much that you weren't able to do. So you just couldn't wait for it to be over so that we could have fruit salad popcorn and watch Star Trek or play our game. And that's kind of how I grew up viewing the Sabbath. Is this like, well, if it's great if we get to go to church, see our friends, and then they get to come over, or I go over to their house, and I would beg for that. I even remember waking my parents up from their Sabbath afternoon nap one time to see if I could go to a friend's house. The rage. I've never been afraid of my mother, but if you're watching this, Mom, that was the one time. I grew up with this idea that Sabbath just wasn't much fun. It's about not working. It's about really not playing. And it's kind of about being bored. And it felt more like a prison than anything else a lot of times. That's not a knock on my parents, by the way. That's just the way it was. It felt like the day was kind of caged. But the more I learn about this day, the more I realize that I've had this dead wrong actually my entire life. And what it's really about is actually freedom. Freedom from slavery. You know where the first place in the Bible the word Sabbath shows up at? Genesis 3. No, there is a seventh day, okay? There's a seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day, but Sabbath does not show up in Genesis chapter 3. Or 1, but for that matter. That's for those. Exodus 20, verse 8. No, it's actually before that. Okay, it's actually before the 10 Commandments are given. If you want to, flip to Exodus chapter 16, and that's where we'll be spending our time today. We get this story from the end of Genesis. Does anybody else find it weird? I mean, if you know the backstory, it's super helpful. Anybody find it weird that from the end of Genesis, we see that everything's gravy? There's this guy named Joseph, and his family is saved, and God uses him being sold into slavery to become one of the most prominent people in the entire Egyptian empire. And he's there, and he uses that to save his family from famine. And everything is great. The Egyptians love the Israelites love the Egyptians, and then we flip to the next book of the Bible, and it's like, what happened here? The heading of Exodus 1 is the Israelites suffering in Egypt. And if you look down at verse 8 on chapter 1, you don't have to look there right now, but it tells us why. There's these wars in Egypt over kingship. And it's probably close to 500 years, but over 400 years since the time of Joseph. And a different king had actually come into power, and a rival empire to the one that was the one where Joseph came into. So let's just think of it this way. If a rival empire comes and destroys this one empire, but there's these allies like the Israelites, how do you think the rivaling empire is going to view the Israelites? They're going to be our enemies because they were loyal to the previous empire, right? And so that's not something we get. That's something we get from history books, but when we flip to Exodus, we're just like, what in the world happened here? Let's just fill in the gaps there, is that's actually what happened, and now they're headed into bondage and slavery. And the new king was paranoid and felt like these people were getting these Israelite immigrants were becoming too many. They were getting too strong. And so he starts killing off the male babies. God witnesses our suffering, doesn't he? Every single one of them. And maybe he didn't stop that in the moment, which is beyond my understanding, by the way. But God sees the suffering of his own people, and he even has enough mercy to actually go after Pharaoh's heart. And he gives Pharaoh chance after chance after chance, this baby-killing tyrant, chance after chance to convert his heart and turn back to him. He brings all these plagues upon him, but Pharaoh continues to harden his heart, turns away. But God finally brings the 10th plague, and it's too much for Pharaoh. He actually uses Pharaoh's own tactics against him and kills all the firstborn children that don't have the marking on their door. Which is, again, oddly what Pharaoh was actually doing to Israel. Pharaoh finally tells them and lets them go for a short time at least, and they miraculously cross the Red Sea. And Pharaoh and his army are destroyed after they try to follow after him and gather them. And this is kind of where this story picks up. Okay, they're singing these songs of deliverance, and they're like, thank you, Lord, so much for delivering us from this evil. And they're singing these amazing songs, and they make the whole thing. One chapter later, what are they doing? They're whining. You just flip the page. The Israelites were grumbling against Moses and Aaron right after celebrating from this amazing salvation, really. In Exodus chapter 13, verse 3, and it says, and the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in Egypt, then we'd sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us into this wilderness to kill us with the whole assembly with hunger. Do you hear what they're saying? We prefer the slavery, by the way. And not only that, okay, this word, if you look in there, okay, push up your glasses, everybody. This is our nerdy moment, okay? But the word sat, right there in the middle of verse 3, the word sat is actually the same letters as Shabbat, as Sabbath. We sat, we rested in Egypt, okay? And we had meat and we had bread. We had everything we could possibly want back in our slavery. We want that back. And now we're not even trusting you, Moses and Aaron, because we saw how God worked back there, but now we're starving. Have you ever had that experience? Have you ever gotten somewhere and you were so sure that God had brought you, you were so sure that God brought you to some place in some time for some reason, and then you're sitting there, what am I even doing here? This is not what I signed up for. This does not feel like life to me. This doesn't feel like what God's leading should be. I'm going to make gardeners out of all of you someday. There is something that a lot of tomato gardeners find out very quickly. One of the biggest mistakes is watering mistakes in tomato gardening. You know this, right, Ron? Every time I come over to your house, you have water going into there, and I still don't understand how you have perfect tomatoes and mine are terrible. What I do know is that typically, we think that underwatering our tomatoes is the main thing. We're too afraid to underwater, and so we end up overwatering the tomatoes. And what ends up happening is the tomatoes either crack or they get this spot on the bottom of it that looks like some mold, and it's called blossom end rot, which is a lack of calcium, by the way. And people put eggshells and all sorts of stuff into their soil thinking that's going to help them, but the problem actually isn't a lack of calcium in the soil. It's that it's so watered down by the time it gets to the tomato that it has no effect on it. That's your gardening lesson for today. One of the best things you can do as a tomato gardener, when the plant becomes a certain age, is actually deprive it from water. Is take the water completely away from it. Do you know why? It forces it to grow. It actually forces the root system down further to reach out for the water, to go searching for the water, and it actually creates a healthier plant, a healthier root system altogether. If you overwater your plant, you'll never develop healthy roots. It will potentially never give off actually good fruit. So why would God do this to his people? Why would he lead them into the wilderness? And why would they start to question him, and they'd start to question Moses and question everything? Is because he actually wants them to search for him. He wants the longing of our heart. He's like, is this really real? Is this really you behind all of this? I think he wants our roots to actually go in search of his presence, of his words. Let's read in chapter 16 right here in verse 6 through 8. It says, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord that brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us? You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. And who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." And there was quail and there was manna, and they shared it and they ate and they celebrated, and some picked a little bit, some picked a lot, and they all actually got to share it. And here we go. In Exodus 16:23, here's the first time it says it. He said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, stopping, a ceasing, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till morning." And so they laid aside till the morning, as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink. There was no worms in it. And Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is the Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh, which is the Sabbath, there will be none." Some try to go out and actually get it on the Sabbath, and it doesn't work out. There isn't any for them. This has been a prominent teaching of ours, that you aren't to work on the Sabbath, right? And we made work kind of the emphasis a lot of times when we look at it. But maybe this is not about work at all. I'm not super great at keeping the Sabbath, okay? Whatever that means. What I'm really good at is doing things that I don't feel guilty on a day. Do you understand the difference? I'm really good at keeping rules, but am I really good at keeping and observing the Sabbath? This day of rest and stopping and ceasing. I remember one in particular that was wonderful. I got to take my last year at Walla Walla University, we got to take the Bible Lands tour. We went to Israel. And Friday night, we got to go into Jerusalem and to actually watch what was happening. And just before sundown, it was crazy. There was all this hustle and bustle, as if it takes a lot of time and energy, and it's really taxing in order to get ready to rest. Right? It is. Collecting 2 days worth of manna is a lot of work. Right? But it was amazing. You could actually, they say you can actually walk the streets and it is dead quiet. There's nothing happening, when just hours before it was insane. This old lady, haggling to get her piece of bread or something down a little bit lower. Quite beautiful. We didn't get to stay there for Sabbath, which I'm kind of sad about, for the Saturday there. I'm kind of sad we didn't, but we went to a national park. And we went to this national park, and we're there, and we're walking around, and there was 2 instances where I was reminded that we are still on Earth. The first one was the bus ride there, because it was hot and it was terrible. The second one, my professor grabbed me, and he took me for a walk. This man was my mentor, and I am very grateful for this man. He took me to the side, and he took me on a little bit of a walk during our lunchtime. We had our previously prepared meals. It's nice to not have to prepare a meal. Didn't taste very good, but it was really nice to not prepare the meal. Takes me for a walk off the side, and we see, we're in this nature preserve, and we see a wild boar. And it's relatively young, but it's about this tall, and it's got about 3 or 4 inch tusks on it. And I'm like, I don't really want to be here. I mean, it's amazing. Let's view it from a distance. And he starts taking pictures, and he goes, "Jake, come on, let's get a little closer." I'm like, it's okay. I'm from Alaska. You're not supposed to approach the wildlife. That's okay. He goes, no, come on, let's get a little closer. And I go, okay. And so we start inching our way a little bit closer and a little bit closer, and he's continuing to take pictures. And I'm like, okay, maybe I can take a few pictures too. And as I raise up to take my pictures of him, I see the hair on the back of this thing stand up. I'm like, that's not good. And I kind of take a step back, and I look over at him, and my teacher's just oblivious, taking pictures away. And I go, okay, this is not good. And it starts to run the other direction. And I'm saying, okay, that we had our fun. That was good, right? Right then, it turns at us and starts charging us. My mentor and my teacher, who I love dearly, and I am here on a large part because of him. Took me and used me as a human shield because this charging boar was coming at us. He goes, Jake, what do we do? What do we do? And I elbow him in the chest to get him off me because I don't know what else to do. So I elbow him in the chest. Get off me, Carl. And I jump up on this picnic table at this wild boar charging us. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with this thing. Do I grab it by the tusk? Do I jump out of the way? I'm not sure. And it is from me to Abe. And it's coming full blast. And my adrenaline's pumping, and I'm just ready for whatever it's going to do. And it turns and bolts off into the woods. And after our adrenaline came down, I kind of looked at my teacher, Carl. I probably shouldn't have named him. And I just had this, I wasn't even mad. I was just like, this is not who I thought you were. But this near-death experience that we found, it gave me a new profound experience for life, okay? And I sat actually the rest of the day. We got to meander around this national park, and I got to see flowers that I didn't even know existed. And I lost track of time. I lost track of where I was. I almost got lost, period. It was amazing. It was a miraculous event. I took pictures of all the flowers because it was nearing Crystal's and my first anniversary. And so I got lost in just taking pictures for her that I was going to send her. And I remember this thought passing through my head that this is what it's going to be like. Someday, this is what it's going to be like, where you lose track of time, where you're just caught up in the beauty and you don't have to worry about the rest of the cares of this life. This is what our home is going to be like. It dawned on me that the Sabbath is a day of remembering. Not the Lord's command, but the Lord's promise. That there is a day coming when we feel the peace and not feeling like we are strangled by the things of this life, a day of ultimate freedom. The seventh day is a day of celebration of our liberty from slavery in anticipation of the great day. Because the reality is that we're all slaves. We are all slaves to something. A slave to some certain passion, maybe we're a slave to our job. For some people, if you're a workaholic, then stopping working is the most Sabbath thing you could possibly do. But unlike the Israelites, we don't live in a world where we're enslaved just to our jobs. There is a ton of stuff out there that we are enslaved to. It promises us life, but in the end, it ends up killing us. We need that promise that life will go on. Actually, if we're a workaholic, sometimes we work and we work and we work and we say, I can't stop working because life won't go on without me doing this. The Sabbath is an opportunity to break you of that. Life will go on. As humbling as that is, life will go on because God is still God. We can have an addiction. We look to our favorite TV show, book, or game, or podcast, or whatever it is to alleviate our stress and to bring us to another world, to teach us that maybe I don't have to feel like this for at least a little while. And we look to these things, and they become actually our things that we run to. We worry about our politics and our news and all the things that are going on, and we can't actually escape the stress of what's going on in the world because it's kind of crazy out there, isn't it? And sometimes we get caught up and we let those emotions actually end up reigning over us because we hear it day in and day out. Happy Sabbath, everybody, by the way. Or maybe we want the most out of life and we are controlled by the fear of missing out, FOMO, right? And that you think that you can control all the time that you want because we consider ourselves masters of our own time. Happy Sabbath. You are not. Time will fail you. You're going to miss out. There's going to be opportunities that we just don't get. The Sabbath is this inconveniencing ourselves with taking an entire day and recognizing that every single day is the Lord's. Recognizing that every single day, no matter what goes on, it actually belongs back to Him. It's a day to stop, to rest, and to celebrate our freedom. And remember the promise that there is one day that's coming where this will actually be forever. The Sabbath is a reminder that we're free from all these things, that you're a child of the Most High God. And while we stress and we worry and we grind our fingers to the bone day after day after day, there is a day coming where our work will be turned to joy, where corrupt politicians and systems and all this stuff, it will fail and God will be back on His throne again. I'm looking forward to that day, aren't you? Where we won't fear of missing out on anything because we finally are at rest, we're finally at peace, and we finally just get to get lost in the natural beauty that He has created for us. That day is coming. Our home is coming. I love today's children's story because we practiced something. It wasn't even real. They didn't give you Jane didn't give us real phones. She gave us fake phones, but the promise is still there, right? What if the Sabbath was less about keeping rules and it was more, okay, there's still rules there, but it was more about celebrating freedom and celebrating that day that's coming? I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot more attractive to me because that's what it was originally intended for. When God gave it to him, it was about the trust that He had with them, that He was the one that brought them out, that He was the one that was going to save them. That's why it was given in the first place, and that's what we should consider it also today. I hope that in our conversations, in our lives, that we can actually revolve around this concept of freedom, of joy, and passion around the day that's coming and the day that's actually here, that we can even pretend that we're in. Is that too strange? Can we just pretend like we are in heaven, okay? It's our heavenly day, and we just pretend like that day is actually here. That's what today is about. Recognizing and remembering the promise that Jesus has in the Sabbath. The Sabbath, as a kid, it was that kind of a cage around the day. And what I'm realizing is the Sabbath is actually a tabernacle of time. You remember the tabernacle? Came down, it was a place where God placed Himself in the middle of His people so that they knew that He did not forget them, that He is there living among them. It's this section of time that He has carved out just for us. I hope that it can be that for us moving forward. Let's have a word of prayer. Jesus, thank You for the Sabbath. Thank You that You're Lord of the Sabbath, and thank You for the reminder of what it is. Sometimes we get caught up in the rules, and the rules are important, Lord. We want to abide by those things and make sure that we're actually following You. Lord, it's hard sometimes because we get caught up in that, or we get caught up in, I don't want to follow rules, and so we just do our own thing, but it's neither of those things. It's reminding ourselves that You remember us. The ruler of the world remembered us. You see our suffering. You see where we're at, and You want to bring us into salvation, both today and for all of eternity. I pray that we remember that in all that we do. Thank You for this day. In Jesus' name, amen.